She saw him for the last time under the rain. "In another life I'll return for you," said the prince. "Before we begin this beautiful period romance story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining me from." The spring of 1817 arrived grey and wet over the Bavarian hills. The morning mist clung to the fields like a veil, soft and cold, turning every sound into a whisper. Anneliese pulled her shawl tighter and walked down the narrow trail leading into the forest. Her basket was half empty, filled with roots and herbs she had gathered for the parish doctor. The war had left the countryside thin and quiet. Even the birds seemed to sing more softly these days. She paused when she heard it, a faint rhythm of hooves. Horses, several of them, moving fast. She frowned. No caravans passed through these woods anymore. It was too close to the border. She stepped off the trail, crouched behind the trunk of an oak, and listened. Voices echoed through the fog, low, tense, urgent. "Search both sides. He can't have gone far." The voice came from the east, sharp and commanding. Then another voice, softer, desperate. "You've made your point, Riedel. I'll go no further." Anneliese leaned forward. A lone rider appeared through the mist, his cloak torn, his horse trembling with exhaustion. He wasn't dressed like a soldier, too fine, too careful, but there was blood on his sleeve and a golden chain around his neck. She saw two men chasing him from behind, each armed with crossbows. Without thinking, she stepped out onto the path. "Sir!" she cried. "This way!" The rider turned, startled, his eyes flashing beneath his hood. He hesitated only a second, then followed her gesture. She ran down a narrow trail she knew by heart, one that curved toward the riverbank. The man's horse stumbled but kept up. Behind them, the sound of pursuit grew louder. "Where are you taking me?" he demanded. "Quiet," she hissed. "If you want to live, follow me." They reached a clearing where a half-collapsed hunting cabin stood among the trees. She pushed open the door, motioning for him to enter. He obeyed, gasping for breath, while she dragged an old crate against the doorway to hide the tracks outside. Inside, the air was damp and smelled of wood smoke, long gone cold. She turned to face him. "Who are you?" she asked. "No one you should know." He pulled off his gloves, wincing as he pressed a hand to his side. Blood darkened the fabric. "You're hurt." "It's nothing." She ignored his protest, tearing a strip from her apron and kneeling beside him. "Hold still." He stared at her as if unsure whether to trust her, but the pain forced him to stay quiet. She cleaned the wound with water from her flask and wrapped it tightly. "Not a deep cut," she murmured. "You were lucky." "Luck had nothing to do with it." She looked up at him. "Then what did?" He hesitated, his jaw tightening. "A mistake." Outside, the shouts grew fainter. She peeked through a crack in the wall and saw nothing but fog. "They're gone," she said. "For now." He exhaled slowly, leaning back against the wall. "You risked much helping a stranger. You looked like you needed help." He gave a short laugh. "I'm not used to being rescued by a girl with mud on her boots." She raised her chin. "And I'm not used to saving men who bleed on my floor. We both have surprises today." That made him smile. A small, tired smile, but real. "What is your name?" "Anneliese." He repeated it softly, as if testing the sound. "Anneliese. And you?" she asked. He looked toward the broken window where the mist swirled like smoke. "Call me Leopold. Is that your real name?" "It will do for now." The hours passed quietly. She made a small fire with dry twigs and shared a piece of bread from her basket. He thanked her, though his eyes stayed distant, thoughtful. "You're not from here," she said. "No. You speak like a man who's used to being obeyed." He looked at her, amused. "Do I?" "Yes. My father spoke that way when he still had a shop and thought himself important. He seemed to consider that. Perhaps I was important once." "Then you should go home before someone else finds you." He didn't answer. Instead, he asked, "What do you do, Anneliese?" "I work for the parish doctor. I gather herbs. I help people who can't pay for medicine." "A healer. A helper," she corrected. "The healing comes from God, not from me." Something in his eyes softened. "Then I owe God and you both my life." She shook her head. "You owe me nothing, but if the soldiers return, I'll owe my freedom. You should leave before nightfall." "I can't. The roads are guarded, and my horse won't last another mile." "Then you'll stay until morning," she said firmly. "No one passes this way at night." He nodded, defeated. "As you command, healer." She pretended not to hear the teasing tone, though it warmed her unexpectedly. When darkness fell, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. The small fire flickered between them. She noticed the gold chain at his neck again, partly hidden beneath his shirt. "That necklace," she said quietly. "It carries a crest, doesn't it?" He froze. "You've sharp eyes." "My father taught me to notice details. Who does it belong to?" "Someone I once trusted." "That doesn't answer my question." He smiled faintly. "You're bold, Annalise. I've lived among soldiers and beggars. Politeness doesn't fill an empty stomach." "Then let me repay you for your courage," he said. "When I can. You don't even know where I live." "I'll find out." She turned away, pretending to fuss with the firewood. "Don't make promises you can't keep." He studied her profile, the determined way she hid her fear behind practical words. "And don't save men whose names you don't trust." That night, rain began to fall in steady sheets, drumming against the roof. She gave him a blanket and sat by the door, refusing to sleep until dawn. From time to time she heard him stir, whispering in his sleep, something about duty, about his father, about a promise he couldn't break. When the first light touched the horizon, he rose quietly. His wound had stopped bleeding. She stood as well, brushing the dust from her skirt. "You're leaving." "I must." "Where will you go?" "To settle what I ran from." She looked at him for a long moment. "Whatever you're facing, I hope it's worth all this." "It isn't," he said softly, "but I have no choice." He reached into his coat, took out a small silver ring, and placed it on the table. "For your kindness." "I don't want payment." "Then take it as a token," he said. "A reminder that you saved a fool." "I'll keep it safe," she said, though her voice was barely a whisper. He hesitated at the door. "If fate is kind, I'll thank you properly one day." She smiled faintly. "Fate rarely is." Their eyes met for the briefest instant. Hers steady, his uncertain, and something unspoken passed between them. Then he pulled his hood up and stepped outside. She followed him to the edge of the clearing. The rain had stopped and mist curled around the trees like smoke from a dying fire. "Which road will you take?" she asked. He pointed east. "Toward the city. Then stay off the main path," she warned. "There are patrols near the bridge." He gave a half smile. "I'll remember that." For a moment he looked as if he might say more. But instead, he simply bowed his head, the gesture quick and solemn, and mounted his horse. "Goodbye, Annalise." "Goodbye, Leopold." He turned the horse and rode into the fog. The sound of hooves faded, swallowed by the forest. Annalise stood there until the last echo disappeared. Her hands trembled, though she didn't know why. Something about him, his bearing, his voice, lingered in her mind like a melody she couldn't forget. She went back inside to clean the place, her thoughts restless. As she lifted his cloak from the bench to shake the dust off, something heavy slid from the inner pocket and landed on the floor with a dull thud. It was a gold medallion marked with an intricate crest, a lion crowned beneath a double cross. She had seen that symbol once before, carved above the gates of the royal palace in Munich. Her breath caught. She stared at it, heart pounding, realizing what it meant. Before dawn fully broke, she stood in the doorway of the cabin, the medallion clutched in her hand, staring into the mist where he had vanished. He hadn't been a lost traveler. He hadn't been a soldier. He was something far more dangerous. The Prince of Bavaria had just ridden away into the forest, and she was the only one who knew. The morning came pale and thin, a soft fog hanging low over the valley. Annalise hadn't slept. The gold medallion lay hidden beneath the loose board of her floor, but her thoughts wouldn't rest. A prince. She had helped a prince escape. At dawn, she walked to the chapel to see Father Ulrich, her hands trembling around her shawl. The old priest looked up from his desk as she entered, his spectacles sliding down his nose. "Annalise, you're up early. Has something happened?" "I found something," she said. "I don't know if I should show you." The priest frowned. "Show me." She took out the medallion and placed it on the table. The gold caught the morning light. Father Ulrich froze, then whispered, "Where did you get this?" "In the woods. I helped a man who was being chased. He left this behind." "Describe him." "Tall, brown hair, wounded. His name was Leopold, at least that's what he told me." Father Ulrich's face drained of color. "Child, do you understand what this is? This crest belongs to the royal house of Wittelsbach. You sheltered the heir to the throne." Annelise's mouth went dry. He said his name was Leopold. It is, the priest said gravely. Prince Leopold of Bavaria. She staggered back. Then the men chasing him must have been from the royal guard. Heaven help us, Annelise. If anyone finds out what you've done, they'll think you were part of his escape. I didn't know. Intent won't matter. The crown protects itself first. You must stay silent. Tell no one. Burn this medallion if you value your life. She shook her head. I can't. It's his. Then hide it well, and pray that the prince returns safely. If he doesn't, the blame will fall on whoever helped him. Annelise nodded, heart racing. She left the chapel with the medallion heavy in her pocket and fear heavy in her chest. That night, long after the lamps had gone dark, a knock sounded at her door. She froze. When she opened it, a man stood outside, soaked from the rain. He wore a dark cloak and kept his hood low. Don't be afraid, he said softly. She recognized the voice instantly. Leopold, she whispered. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. I couldn't leave without thanking you properly. You shouldn't be here. The guards are searching for you. I know. That's why I came by night. He smiled faintly. You still have my ring. Yes, she said. And something else you left behind. She took the medallion from her pocket and placed it in his hand. He looked at it for a long moment. Then at her. You shouldn't have kept this. I thought it mattered. It does, he said quietly. It's my father's. I wore it when I swore loyalty to him. She studied his face. Then why are you running from him? His eyes darkened. Because he's trading me like a coin. There's a treaty with Württemberg. To secure it, he's promised me to a princess I've never met. I refused. He called me ungrateful, dishonorable. I left before he could make me bow. Annelise frowned. And now you're hunted. Yes, I'll return when he cools his temper. Will he? He smiled tiredly. Kings have short tempers and long memories. She looked down. You should rest. There's bread and water. He didn't move. I shouldn't stay. But I wanted to see you again. Why? Because you didn't ask who I was when you helped me. You didn't bow or flatter or tremble. You simply acted. I didn't know I was saving a prince. Would you have done differently if you had? She thought about it. No, but I might have been more afraid. Then I'm glad you didn't know. Their eyes met, and for a moment the silence between them felt alive. Then she stepped back and said quietly, If you wish to thank me, leave before sunrise. They'll come searching. He nodded, though his expression was reluctant. I'll go, but I'll return when I can. Don't make promises you can't keep, Highness. Leopold, he corrected. Just Leopold. Before he left, he took her hand. If anything happens, if they question you, say nothing. I'll see to it that no harm comes to you. How could you? She asked softly. You're a fugitive. He smiled faintly. For now, when he disappeared into the rain, the small house felt emptier than ever. The next morning, rumors swept through the village. Travelers whispered of a prince gone missing. The royal guards were searching every farm, every road, every barn. Annelise's stomach twisted as she heard the gossip at the market. Some say he was kidnapped, one woman murmured. Others say he ran away with a mistress. A mistress, another scoffed. A prince. He wouldn't stoop so low. Annelise turned away, trying to steady her breathing. That night, she hid the ring and the medallion again, deeper this time. 2 days later, she found a sealed note beneath the loose stone by her door. No signature, just one line written in careful script. Meet me by the old mill tonight. She almost didn't go. But something inside her couldn't resist. The moon was hidden behind clouds when she reached the mill. He was there, waiting, dressed in a plain coat instead of royal blue. You shouldn't have come, she said. I had to, he answered. I'm leaving for the capital tomorrow. I'll face my father. She searched his eyes. You'll surrender? I'll speak, not bow. I have to try to reason with him. My place is in the palace, not in hiding. But before I go, I needed to see you again. She swallowed. Why? He smiled faintly. Because in this whole cursed world, you're the only one who's treated me as a man, not a title. The rain started again, light and steady. He stepped closer. When I saw you in the forest, I thought I was lost. Then you appeared like... Don't say something poetic, she interrupted. It doesn't suit you. He laughed softly. You're right, but I owe you the truth. You've been in my thoughts every hour since that day. She looked away. You're going back to your world. You'll forget me by next week. I won't, he said. I swear it. Swear nothing, Leopold. Swear to live, that's all. He took something from his pocket, a small handkerchief embroidered with his family's crest. Keep this. When I return, I'll ask for it back. She hesitated, then took it. You'll never find me again once you return to the palace. He smiled, his eyes bright. I will. I'll find you, Anneliese, even if I have to search the whole kingdom. A distant sound broke the moment. Hooves coming fast down the road. He froze. They found me, he whispered. Go, she said, pushing him toward the back door. Go through the woods. He grabbed her hand. Promise me you'll stay safe. I promise. Now go. He ran into the darkness, the rain swallowing his figure. Moments later, torches appeared on the road. Soldiers dismounted, shouting orders. An officer stepped forward, face stern beneath his hat. You there, he barked. Have you seen anyone pass this way? Anneliese's heart pounded, but her voice stayed calm. No one, sir. Liar, one of the men muttered. Tracks lead here. The officer scanned her face, eyes sharp. Your name? Anneliese Bauer. He turned to his men. Search the mill. They stormed inside. She stood perfectly still, rain dripping from her hair. After several tense minutes, one of the soldiers called out, Nothing here, Captain. The officer frowned. Keep her under watch. If the prince was here, she knows it. The prince? She repeated, pretending confusion. He narrowed his eyes but said nothing more. They mounted their horses and rode off, the sound fading into the night. Anneliese's knees gave way when they were gone. She pressed her hands to her face and tried not to cry. The next morning, news spread across the region. The prince had returned to the palace. He had met with his father. There would be a royal announcement soon. Relief and sadness fought inside her. He was safe, but their world was too far apart now. Days later, a royal courier arrived in the village. People gathered in the square as he unrolled a parchment and read the proclamation. His Royal Highness, Prince Leopold of Bavaria, announces his forthcoming union with Her Grace, Princess Matilda of Württemberg, by order of His Majesty the King. The crowd cheered. Anneliese felt her heart crack silently inside her chest. She turned and walked away before anyone noticed. That evening, as she sat by her small window, a knock came at the door. It was Father Ulrich again, holding a folded paper sealed with red wax. It was delivered by a palace servant, he said. Addressed to you. She stared at the seal, unbroken, marked with the royal crest. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single line written in familiar handwriting. No matter the distance, I will find the road back to you. Her vision blurred as she read it again and again, the words glowing faintly in the candlelight. Outside, thunder rolled over the valley, and somewhere beyond the palace walls, a promise had just begun to burn. The weeks after the royal decree felt like years. Every corner of the village buzzed with talk of the upcoming wedding. Children hummed songs about the future queen. Merchants decorated their stalls in blue and gold. Anneliese kept her head down and her mouth shut, pretending not to hear. The letter from Leopold stayed hidden beneath her pillow, folded so many times the ink had begun to fade. She tried to focus on her work at the infirmary, grinding herbs, cleaning wounds, fetching water from the stream. But every time she looked toward the horizon, she thought of him, how he had smiled when he said he would return. She hated herself for believing it. One afternoon, while hanging linens behind the chapel, she overheard two men whispering near the fence. They say the prince looks pale, one said. Doesn't eat, doesn't smile, the princess barely knows him. Doesn't matter, the other replied. A crown's heavier than love. That's the way of things. Their laughter stung more than it should have. Anneliese turned away, blinking hard. That night a storm broke over the hills. She lay awake listening to the thunder, half dreaming that someone might knock at her door again. But the night stayed silent. The next morning a young boy ran through the village shouting, "Royal Guards, they're coming!" Within minutes the main road filled with soldiers in dark blue uniforms. The captain, a man with silver at his temples and a face carved from stone, dismounted before the church. By order of His Majesty, he called, all residents will answer questions regarding the disappearance of the crown's seal 3 weeks ago. The villagers froze. Anneliese's heart sank. The medallion. Father Ulrich stepped forward. Captain, our people are loyal. You'll find no thieves here. The captain's gaze swept the crowd. We'll see. He turned to his men. Search every home. No exceptions. They started at one end of the street. Anneliese hurried back to her cottage, trying not to run. Once inside, she pulled the loose board from the floor and stared at the small bundle wrapped in cloth, the medallion and the ring. Her hands shook as she lifted them out. If they found these, she'd be ruined. She shoved both items into a jar of dried lavender and set it high on the shelf. When the knock came at her door moments later, she forced her voice steady. Come in. 2 soldiers entered, their boots leaving muddy prints on her floor. The captain followed, his sharp eyes taking in everything. Anneliese Bauer? Yes, Captain. You live alone? Yes. Have you seen any strangers in the past month? No, she lied. Only the travelers who stop at the mill. He studied her face as if measuring truth and fear. You were seen speaking with Father Ulrich the morning the prince returned to the palace. He's our priest, she said. I speak with him often. The captain's gaze drifted to the shelves. You keep herbs. For medicine. He reached for one of the jars. Her breath caught. Not that one. Please, not that one. He opened another, sniffed, nodded, and set it down. We'll be brief, he said. The crown seal is missing, and the prince insists it was lost during his travels. But someone saw him near these woods before his return. If anyone helped him, it would be considered treason. She swallowed hard. I wouldn't know anything about that. See that you don't. He motioned for his men to leave. At the door he paused. If you remember anything at all, report it to me directly. My camp will be by the river. When they were gone, she sank to her knees, trembling. That night she went to the chapel again. Father Ulrich was waiting, lighting candles along the altar. They questioned you? He asked. Yes. They're searching every home. Then you must destroy what you have, Anneliese. I can't. You must. That medallion ties you to him if they find it. I said I can't, she cried, louder than she meant to. Her voice echoed against the stone walls. He trusted me with it. I won't betray that. The priest sighed heavily. My child, the world is not kind to loyalty. She turned away. Then let it be unkind. A week later, word spread that the royal guard had left the region. The searches stopped, and life returned to its rhythm. But whispers still followed her wherever she went. Isn't she the girl the soldiers questioned? They say she spoke with the prince once. She's lucky they didn't take her. She ignored them all, but every look, every murmur, felt like a needle under her skin. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the bells of the church rang for vespers, a cloaked rider appeared at the edge of the village. Anneliese was walking home when she saw him dismount near the old oak by the stream. He raised his hood just enough for her to see his face. Her breath caught. Leopold. He smiled faintly. I told you I'd come back. She ran to him, glancing around to make sure no one saw. You can't be here. If they find you, they won't. I came alone. Why? Because I couldn't keep the promise I made to my father. I can't marry someone I don't love. She froze. You shouldn't tell me this. Then let me tell you something else. His voice softened. Every night I think of you. Every time I close my eyes, I see that cabin, the rain, your face. Tell me that means nothing, and I'll leave this instant. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Anneliese, he said, stepping closer. Say something. You shouldn't have come, she whispered. If they catch you, it will cost you everything. Then let them take everything. I've already lost what matters. Her eyes filled with tears. You belong to your people, not to me. Maybe I don't want to belong to anyone anymore. The wind stirred the trees around them. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she took the handkerchief he'd given her and pressed it into his palm. Keep this, she said. When you hold it, remember there was someone who saw you as a man, not a prince. He looked at the cloth, then at her. You're sending me away again. I'm saving you, she said. He nodded slowly. Then let me give you something too. He reached into his coat and took out a small silver pendant, shaped like a lion. It was my brother's. Keep it for luck. She hesitated, then accepted it. Their hands brushed, and the touch lingered longer than it should have. You have to go, she said. They'll notice your horse. He stepped closer, his voice low. Do you really want me to leave? Her answer came as a whisper. No. For a heartbeat, they simply looked at each other, the air between them heavy with all the words they couldn't say. Then a shout echoed from the road. There! By the river! Leopold turned sharply. Torches flickered through the trees. Go! Anneliese cried. They've seen you! He caught her hand. Promise me, no matter what happens, you'll keep that pendant. I promise. Now go! He mounted his horse, eyes still on her. I'll come back for you. Don't! She shouted, but he was already gone, galloping into the night. Moments later, the soldiers burst into the clearing. Their captain dismounted, his face hard. You again, he said coldly. We saw someone with you. Who was he? No one, she said. A traveller asking for the road. Liar, one of the men spat. The captain raised a hand to silence him. If you're hiding someone of importance, girl, it won't go well for you. Think carefully. She lifted her chin. I told you it was a traveller. Look for him if you don't believe me. The captain studied her a long moment, then turned to his men. Search the area. They scattered into the woods. When they returned empty-handed, he looked frustrated. If I find out you're lying, Anneliese Bauer, there will be no mercy. I'm telling the truth, she said quietly. He stared at her one last time, then mounted his horse and rode off. When the sound of hooves faded, she fell to her knees, shaking. The pendant still lay warm in her hand. The next morning, half the village gathered outside her door. Whispers spread like fire. Someone had seen her with the prince. Someone else had told the captain. By noon, the guards were back. This time, they didn't knock. They took her by the arms and led her toward the city road as the villagers watched in silence. No one spoke in her defense. No one dared. The captain rode ahead, unreadable. By order of the king, he said, you'll be brought to the palace for questioning regarding your contact with His Royal Highness. Her heart pounded, but she kept her voice calm. I did nothing wrong, he didn't answer. As they passed the river bend, she looked up at the grey sky and thought she saw a figure far away on horseback, watching from the ridge. She couldn't tell if it was real or a dream, and as the soldiers led her away, the echo of his promise still rang in her ears. Somewhere beyond the trees, a bell tolled from the city walls, and she knew her fate had just changed forever. The journey to the capital lasted 2 days. The soldiers barely spoke to her, stopping only to rest their horses and eat in silence. Anneliese kept her eyes on the horizon, her wrists raw from the ropes that bound them. Every turn of the wheel, every stone on the road, brought her closer to the palace, the place she had only seen from afar, shining like a dream, now looming like a threat. When they reached Munich, the streets were crowded. Flags hung from windows, and people craned their necks to glimpse the royal procession preparing for the prince's betrothal ceremony. Anneliese sat in the wagon, her dress damp from the rain, while children pointed and whispered. Who is she? Someone asked. A criminal, another replied. They say she seduced the prince. She shut her eyes. The guards led her through the great iron gates of the palace. Inside, the marble floors gleamed beneath chandeliers, and the air smelled of wax and perfume. She felt smaller with each step. At the far end of the hall, a pair of double doors opened, revealing a throne and a man seated upon it, King Wilhelm of Bavaria. His gaze was cold, sharp as a blade. Bring her forward, he ordered. Anneliese walked until her knees nearly gave out. She tried to curtsy, but the guard pushed her down to kneel. Name, the king said. Anneliese Bauer, your majesty. You know why you're here? No, sire. He gestured to the captain standing beside him. Tell her. The captain cleared his throat. This woman is accused of harboring His Royal Highness, Prince Leopold, during his unauthorized absence from the palace, and of spreading rumors that endanger the reputation of the crown. I spread no rumors, Anneliese said, and I didn't know who he was. The king leaned forward. Yet you spoke with him, alone. You hid him in your home. Is that not true? Yes, she whispered. But he was injured. I only wanted to help. Help, the king repeated, his tone dripping with disdain. You call it help, others call it ambition. I never— Silence, he snapped. The hall went quiet. Do you understand what your actions cost this family? My son defied my command, abandoned his duty, and risked the future of Bavaria. And you— He pointed at her. You were the reason. Tears burned her eyes. "He came to me by chance. I didn't ask for him." The king rose, his robe sweeping across the marble floor. "You will leave this city by dawn. You are forbidden to speak of this to anyone. Should you defy that order, you'll face imprisonment." Annalise tried to stand, but her legs failed. "Please, sire, I meant no harm." "Enough!" The sound of the doors opening broke the tension. A voice, steady and familiar, cut through the silence. "Father." Leopold stepped into the room. He was dressed in his formal uniform, his expression unreadable. The guards bowed, the courtiers murmured. "What is the meaning of this?" the king demanded. "You were not summoned." "I came for her." The court gasped. The king's face darkened. "You disgrace yourself with every word. Leave us." "No," Leopold said firmly. "She is innocent. It was I who sought her help. If blame must fall, let it fall on me." The king's voice grew low and dangerous. "You will remember who you are speaking to." "I remember," Leopold said, "and I also remember that a king is meant to be just." For a long moment, father and son stared at each other. Then the king spoke, quiet but deadly. "You will never see this girl again. Is that understood?" Leopold's hands clenched at his sides. "You can't command the heart, father. You forget yourself." "I forget nothing," Leopold said, his voice breaking. "You taught me duty, but you also taught me honor, and dishonor would be condemning a woman who saved my life." The king turned to his guards. "Remove her." "No!" Leopold shouted, stepping forward, but two soldiers restrained him. Annalise looked at him, her voice trembling. "Don't. Please. Don't fight him." He struggled against their grip. "Annalise, enough!" The king's voice thundered through the hall. "You will be confined to your quarters until your wedding. You have shamed this crown long enough." Leopold stopped resisting. His shoulders dropped, his breath ragged. "Father," he said quietly, "if you destroy everything I care for, there will be nothing left of the son you wanted." The king didn't answer. He turned away. "Take him out." The guards led the prince from the room, and the sound of his boots echoed like a drumbeat of defeat. When the doors closed, the king looked back at Annalise. "You see what you've done? You've turned my son against his blood." She shook her head. "I only wanted to help him." "Then help him now," the king said coldly. "Leave this place, forget his name, forget this ever happened." The guards pulled her to her feet and led her out of the hall. She didn't resist. Outside, the sky had begun to darken. The air smelled of rain again. They took her to a small guest room in the outer wing of the palace and locked her inside until morning. A single candle burned on the table. She sat on the bed, staring at the flame until her vision blurred. When the door opened hours later, she expected the captain. Instead, it was a young maid with kind eyes. "Miss Bauer?" the maid whispered. "I was told to bring you this." She handed Annalise a folded letter sealed with red wax. Annalise broke it open. "Annalise," it read, "I tried to speak for you, but he wouldn't listen. By dawn, they'll send you away. Please know that I meant every word I said in the woods. Whatever comes, you are not forgotten." At the bottom, his name, Leopold. Annalise pressed the letter to her heart, her tears falling on the ink. At sunrise, they escorted her beyond the city gates. The streets were empty except for the distant echo of bells from the cathedral. The captain who had arrested her rode beside the carriage. "You're fortunate," he said. "Others have been punished more severely for less." "Fortunate," she repeated, staring out the window. "Yes." They stopped at the edge of a forest road. The captain dismounted and opened the door. "You're free to go. But remember the king's command. If you ever return to the capital, you'll be imprisoned." She stepped down, her shoes sinking into the wet earth. "What will happen to him?" she asked. The captain hesitated. "He'll do his duty. That's what princes do." He mounted his horse again. "Forget him, girl. It's safer that way." The carriage turned around and disappeared down the road, leaving her alone among the trees. She walked until her feet bled, until the road turned to mud, and the forest swallowed the sound of the city behind her. When night fell, she found an abandoned chapel by the river and collapsed inside, too tired to cry. The next morning, she made her way to a small village nestled in the hills. No one knew her name there. She told them she was a healer, looking for work. The baker gave her a corner room above his shop, and life began again, quiet, colorless, but safe. Months passed. Sometimes she thought she heard his voice in the rain. Sometimes she dreamed of the palace hall and woke with her hands clenched, as if still bound by ropes. One evening, as winter crept through the valley, a messenger arrived at the bakery. He asked for her by name. "I'm sorry," she said, startled. "You must be mistaken." He shook his head. "No mistake. I was told to deliver this to Anneliese Bauer." He handed her a sealed envelope bearing the royal crest. Her heart stuttered. "Who sent it?" He smiled faintly. "A friend who cannot speak openly." She tore it open. Inside was a single piece of parchment, blank except for one line written in his familiar hand. "I will find you." For a long time she stood there, unable to move, the words burning into her memory. But even as she read them, she knew the walls of the palace still stood between them, and that promises made in whispers could crumble beneath a crown. That night, she hid the letter beneath her pillow, closed her eyes, and tried to believe he would keep his word. At dawn, hooves echoed faintly on the road outside her window. She rushed to look, heart pounding. In the grey mist, a rider was watching her from the ridge before turning away. 3 years passed. The war came like a storm that no one could stop. Bavaria's banners rode north with the sound of drums, and the names of the dead began to fill every prayer. Villages emptied of sons, the land of laughter. Yet in a small town near the mountains, life clung on in quiet corners. Anneliese worked in a modest inn at the crossroads, tending travelers and soldiers who came wounded or hungry. She still wore plain grey dresses, still tied her hair with a simple ribbon. Her hands were always busy, carrying trays, washing linens, changing bandages. But her thoughts never stopped wandering to the past. The baker's wife, Greta, often scolded her gently. "You work too much, child. You never go dancing, never smile. Were you born an old woman?" "I'm fine," Anneliese would reply, keeping her eyes down. "Fine," she says, Greta would mutter. "Fine," with eyes that looked like rain. At night, when the inn grew quiet, Anneliese would stand by the window and watch the clouds gather over the peaks. Sometimes she whispered his name. She didn't even know if he was alive. The newspapers said the king was dead, the prince had taken command, and the war raged on. No one spoke of a wedding. One evening, a carriage stopped in front of the inn. The horses were covered in mud and a soldier jumped down, shouting for water and shelter. He looked half dead with exhaustion. "Bring him inside," Anneliese said quickly. "Lay him near the fire." They carried him to a bench. His uniform was torn, his boots soaked through. When she brought a towel, he caught her wrist. "Is this the innkeeper's place?" he rasped. "Yes," she said. "You're safe. Rest." "I can't. I have news from the capital. The war's nearly done." Greta crossed herself. "God be praised." But the soldier shook his head. "Not yet. The king fell ill weeks ago. The prince hasn't returned. Some say he's missing." Anneliese froze. "Missing?" "His battalion was attacked by night. They found no trace, only this." He reached into his bag and pulled out a folded cloth. She recognized it before he opened it. A handkerchief, white and faded, embroidered with her initial A. Her heart stopped. "Where did you get that?" "Found it in the ruins after the battle," the man said. "They said it belonged to someone close to him." She took it, trembling. "Thank you." He nodded and closed his eyes. Within minutes, he was asleep by the fire. Anneliese walked outside into the cold air. Snow had begun to fall. She stared at the handkerchief in her hands, her throat tight. He had carried it with him. He had kept his promise, even in war. Greta followed her to the door. "Anneliese, what's wrong?" "Nothing," she said softly. "Just the wind." But that night, long after everyone slept, she climbed the hill behind the inn. The world was quiet except for the whisper of snow. She knelt by a stone wall, holding the cloth to her chest. "If you're gone," she whispered, "then take this pain with you. I can't keep carrying it." The wind howled through the valley, but no answer came. Days turned into weeks. Spring came again, though it felt colder than before. Merchants passed through with new stories. One said the prince's body had been found near the border. Another swore he had seen him alive, traveling under a false name. Anneliese listened to them all but said nothing. Then, one afternoon, a man arrived on horseback, his cloak tattered and his face shadowed by dust. He ordered a meal and sat in the corner, saying little. His hands were rough, his accent strange. When she brought his food, he looked up at her, startled. "You're not from here," he said. "Neither are you," she replied. He smiled faintly. "Fair enough, you remind me of someone." She didn't ask who. Something in his voice made her heart ache, though she couldn't say why. That night, the stranger left without a word. When she went to clear the table, she found a single silver coin under his cup, too fine for a common traveler. She stared at it for a long moment, then closed her hand around it. "Foolish hope," she whispered to herself. The next morning, the roads filled with noise again, wagons, soldiers, and bells. Greta burst through the kitchen door, breathless. "The war is over! The army returns home!" The inn filled with cheering. Men hugged, women cried, children ran into the street. Annalise stood by the window, unmoving. That evening, the messenger who carried news between towns arrived, drenched from rain. He asked for ale, then for a chair by the fire. "Is it true?" Greta asked him. "Peace?" "Aye," the man said. "The borders hold. Bavaria stands." He took a long drink, then lowered his voice. "But the prince did not return with them. They say he fell on the last night of battle." Annalise felt the room tilt. Greta's hand reached for her arm, but she barely noticed. The messenger kept talking, unaware. "They buried him where he fell near the riverbank. His men swore he went back to save a wounded soldier. Never came out again." Annalise rose from her chair. "Excuse me," she murmured. She walked outside into the downpour, ignoring Greta's voice calling her name. The rain soaked through her dress in seconds. She walked toward the mountains, her steps quick and aimless. The sky cracked open with thunder. When she reached the ridge, she looked down at the valley and saw nothing but mist. Her hair clung to her face, her lungs burned. She sank to her knees. "Leopold," she whispered, "you promised." She pulled the handkerchief from her pocket. The rain blurred the threads, washing the letter of her name into the cloth. "Wherever you are," she said, "I hope you remember me." She stayed there until the storm eased. When she finally rose, dawn had turned the horizon silver. Days later, Greta found her sitting by the fire again, silent, eyes fixed on the window. "Come," Greta said gently. "Eat something. He wouldn't want you to fade away." Annalise nodded but didn't move. "He's gone." "You don't know that. I do." The weeks dragged by. Then one night another messenger arrived. This one older, his uniform torn but clean. He carried a satchel of royal seals. "Letters for the capital?" Greta asked. "No," the man said. "Deliveries for the royal archives. I just came from there." Annalise's heart skipped. "From Munich?" He nodded. "Yes. The city prepares for a new coronation. The old king is dead. The council will name a successor." She tried to speak, but her voice came out as a whisper. "A successor? Then Prince Leopold—" "Gone," the man interrupted. "The war took him." He reached into his bag and pulled out a small folded paper. This was found among the prince's effects. They said it was addressed to a healer from the northern villages. I was told to ask for that name. Annalise's fingers shook as she took it. The writing on the front was faded, but she knew the hand instantly. Inside, the words were simple. "If this reaches you, it means I have kept my word. I will come back to you in this life or the next." She pressed the paper to her lips, her tears falling silently onto the ink. Greta touched her shoulder. "What is it?" "Nothing," Annalise said. "Just a goodbye." That night, she climbed the hill again. The rain returned, gentle and cold. She held the letter high, letting the drops fall over it like a blessing. "Then wait for me," she whispered. "Wherever you are, wait." Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the valley below. Somewhere far away, a church bell tolled, slow and hollow, echoing through the mist. She turned toward the sound, unsure if it was real, or if the wind had spoken his name again. The spring rains came early that year, turning the mountain paths into streams of silver. The inn had emptied of soldiers, but the silence it left behind was worse than war itself. Annalise moved through her days as if sleepwalking, sweeping floors, mending linens, tending to travelers who spoke of victory as if it were a miracle. Yet inside her, everything still felt hollow. One afternoon, while washing bandages near the river, she heard a voice behind her. "You shouldn't stand so close to the water, it's rising fast." She turned, startled. It was a peddler leading a mule loaded with cloth and candles. His smile was kind. "I've seen you before," he said. "At the inn up the road." "Yes," she replied. "Do you need food or rest?" "Only directions," he said. "Is this the way to the capital?" She pointed toward the valley. "Follow the river east." He nodded, then hesitated. "You look like someone waiting for news." She looked down. "The news I wait for won't come." He studied her face, then gave a quiet nod. "Still, hope has a strange way of walking back through the door when we least expect it." When he left, she watched him disappear into the fog and wondered if hope really could walk back. That night, the storm returned. Rain drummed against the roof, cold and steady. She stood by the window, staring at the mountain road that curved down toward the valley. For the first time in months, she whispered a prayer. Not for peace, not for strength, but for a sign. The next morning, the world seemed washed clean. The clouds thinned. The air carried the scent of wet pine. Annalise packed her herbs and decided to visit the old chapel on the hill, the place she had first prayed for him after the war. She walked slowly, her shoes sinking into the damp ground. When she reached the chapel, she knelt beside the worn altar and closed her eyes. "If there's still a path for me," she murmured, "show it." A sudden gust blew through the broken window, scattering the dried petals on the floor. She opened her eyes and froze. Outside on the path below, a rider was passing through the mist. The figure was cloaked, face hidden, but something about his posture struck her like lightning. The way he sat straight in the saddle, the way he turned his head as if searching the horizon. Her heart began to race. She stumbled outside, calling out, "Sir, wait!" The rider didn't stop. He vanished around the bend. She ran after him, breathless, her skirts heavy with mud. When she reached the road, there was no one there, only hoofprints leading toward the main road to Munich. For a long time she stood staring at them, trembling. Then she whispered, "No, it can't be." But she knew the truth in her bones. 2 days later, a caravan passed through town carrying goods bound for the capital. The driver mentioned that the crown had a new king. "The old one's gone," he said. "The council crowned his son last week." Greta, who was wiping the counter, dropped her rag. "The prince? But they said he was dead." The driver shrugged. "So did I, yet there he stood, alive, though he looked like he'd fought the devil himself. He's changed, they say. Quieter. Keeps to himself." Annalise felt the blood drain from her face. She steadied herself on the table. "Did you see him?" "From a distance. Tall. Scar across his temple. Looks older now. A good man, I think." She excused herself and went outside, her breath shallow. He was alive. That night she packed what little she had. A cloak, her herbs, the handkerchief, and the letter that still carried his last words. Greta begged her to stay. "Annalise, don't be foolish. You don't belong in that world." "I never did," she said. "But I have to know if he remembers." Greta sighed and pressed a loaf of bread into her hands. "Then go. But if your heart breaks again, don't come back empty." Annalise left before dawn. The road to the capital was long and lined with stories. Villages rebuilding, fields once burned, now green again. Each night she slept by the roadside, dreaming of rain and the sound of a voice saying her name. When she reached Munich, the city was alive with celebration. Bells rang, banners fluttered from balconies, and people filled the square shouting, "Long live the king!" She pulled her hood low and slipped into the crowd. At the far end of the plaza, the palace gates were open. Soldiers stood at attention while a procession made its way to the cathedral, and there he was, Leopold. He rode at the head of the line, his uniform black and silver, his face more solemn than she remembered. The scar across his brow caught the sunlight like a thread of glass. Her breath caught. He was real, alive, but he wasn't looking at the crowd. His eyes stayed fixed ahead, distant, unreadable. She took a step forward, but the people pressed in closer, shouting, waving flags. When the ceremony ended, he dismounted and disappeared through the cathedral doors. She waited, trembling, her heart hammering like a drum. When he finally emerged, hours later, he stood at the top of the steps, addressing his people. His voice was steady, though faint enough that she could barely hear. "I return not as a prince, but as a man who has seen too much of loss," he said. "Bavaria will heal, and so will I." The crowd cheered. Annalise felt tears rise. She wanted to call his name, to make him turn, to make him see her, but she couldn't. She slipped away before the guards began to clear the square. That night, She found a small room in the poorer district near the old market. The landlord didn't ask questions. From her window she could see the spires of the palace glowing against the storm clouds. She spent the next days wandering the city. Every face she saw reminded her of him. Every sound of hooves made her turn her head. Once she thought she saw him riding through the garden at dusk, but when she blinked the image was gone. Finally, unable to bear it, she wrote a short letter. Your Majesty, if you remember the forest and the rain, you will know who sends this. I do not ask for favor or forgiveness, only to see you once more, to know you live, truly, and not only in my memory. She folded it and slipped it into an envelope. That night, under the cover of fog, she crept to the palace gates and left it between the iron bars. Then she waited. Days passed. No reply came. She told herself it was foolish to hope, until one morning, as she prepared to leave her room, she noticed something on her windowsill, a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside was her own handkerchief, the one she had given him years before, and a single note in his familiar handwriting. Some promises never end. Her hands trembled. She pressed the cloth to her face, tears spilling down her cheeks. He had seen her letter. He knew she was here. That night, unable to stay still, she returned to the palace gardens. She hid among the trees, waiting, watching the windows of the east wing where she knew the royal chambers were. Hours passed, the moon rose, and then faintly she heard footsteps on the gravel path. A man appeared, his cloak brushing the ground. He stopped by the fountain, the torchlight catching his profile. It was him. She stepped from the shadows. Leopold. He turned, and for a moment he didn't move. Then he whispered, Anneliese. Her breath caught. You're alive. So are you. They stood facing each other, neither daring to take another step. The years, the pain, the silence, all of it hung between them. I shouldn't be here, she said. Nor I, he replied. But you are. Why did you answer my letter? He smiled faintly. Because I meant what I said. I would find the road back to you. Her voice trembled. Then why didn't you come sooner? Because a king belongs to his people first, he said quietly. And I didn't know if you still wanted to see me. Her tears fell freely now. I never stopped wanting that. He stepped closer, his hand brushing hers. Neither did I. From somewhere beyond the garden walls came the faint echo of a bell, calling the city to prayer. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to smile. Then she noticed movement near the palace gates, guards, their torches swaying in the darkness. Leopold glanced toward them, his voice low. If they find you here, they'll think you're a spy. I don't care. But I do, he said. Go back to where you're staying. I'll send for you when I can. Will you keep that promise this time? He took her hand, pressing something into her palm. I've already begun. She looked down. It was a ring, plain silver, the same one he had once left in her cottage long ago. Before she could speak, he turned and vanished into the shadows of the palace garden. She stood frozen, the ring cold in her hand, her heart pounding louder than the rain that had begun to fall again. From beyond the gates, a soldier's voice shouted, Who's there? Anneliese ran. The next morning, the city of Munich stirred with celebration. Trumpets sounded from the palace walls, and the people filled the streets waving banners embroidered with the royal crest. From her small attic room near the marketplace, Anneliese watched the procession forming below. Soldiers, nobles, and servants rushing about in preparation for the king's first public address. She hadn't slept. The ring lay in her hand all night, its weight impossible to ignore. He was alive. He remembered her. But now, daylight turned that fragile secret into danger. Every whisper in the street could be a spy's ear. Every knock at the door could bring a question she couldn't answer. When the bells began to toll, she stepped outside and joined the crowd moving toward the palace square. People cheered and waved flags, their voices echoing against the stone facades. The rain had stopped, leaving the cobblestones shining under the morning sun. She kept to the back of the crowd, her hood pulled low. The palace gates opened and soldiers in polished armor lined the steps. Then from the great doorway, Leopold appeared. The sight of him hit her like wind. His hair was shorter, his shoulders broader, his face marked with a thin scar across his temple. He wore no crown, only the royal sash across his chest. The people shouted his name and he lifted his hand in acknowledgement, but his eyes seemed elsewhere, searching the sea of faces as if looking for something or someone he couldn't find. The Chancellor stepped forward and called for silence. By decree of the Council and the will of the late King, Leopold Wilhelm now reigns as sovereign of Bavaria. Long live the King! Long live the King! The crowd roared back. Leopold began to speak, his voice calm and clear. My father built this kingdom on discipline and duty, but I have seen enough blood to know that peace is the true measure of strength. From this day forward, Bavaria will stand not by fear, but by faith in one another. Applause thundered through the square. Anneliese felt tears in her eyes, though she didn't know why. He looked older, lonelier. When he turned slightly toward the crowd, she saw his hand lift, almost imperceptibly, to his chest, the same gesture he used to make when hiding something in his coat pocket. A secret signal. Her breath caught. She pressed a hand to the ring hidden in her glove. Later that evening, the city was alive with music and torches. Inns overflowed with laughter, and fireworks burst above the rooftops. Anneliese stayed near the riverbank, watching the reflections on the water. She had no plan, only the certainty that he would send for her. Just as she began to doubt, a carriage stopped at the far end of the street. A man in a dark uniform stepped down and approached her quietly. Are you Anneliese Bauer? She froze. Who asks? From His Majesty, the man said. He requests your presence at the palace garden, tonight. Her pulse quickened. Now, he nodded. Now, come before the guards change shifts. She followed him through the narrow lanes, her heart pounding with every turn. When they reached the palace gates, the soldier motioned for her to wait behind a hedge of cypress trees. Moments later, footsteps approached. She recognized his stride before she saw his face. Leopold stepped from the shadows, no crown, no cloak, just a man again. You came, he said softly. I shouldn't have, she whispered. If someone sees me, no one will. I made sure of it. She searched his eyes. You're king now. I'm still me. He reached for her hands, and when their fingers touched, all the years between them vanished. I thought you were dead, she said. I nearly was. Twice. Why didn't you write? I couldn't. They would have found you. He smiled faintly, but I carried this with me. From his coat, he drew the folded handkerchief she had embroidered long ago, the threads worn thin but still bright. It reminded me that somewhere in this kingdom there was truth. Her eyes filled with tears. You kept it all this time? Through every battle, through every storm. She looked at him for a long moment. You can't be seen with me, Leopold. You have a duty. He sighed. The council thinks duty means marriage to a noble house. They already speak of alliances and treaties. Her voice trembled. Then you'll marry. He shook his head. I can't. Not while you exist in my world. She stepped back. Don't say things that will destroy you. I've already been destroyed once, he said quietly, the day they took you away from me. Silence hung between them. The sound of the river and the distant laughter of the city filled the air. He took a breath. Come with me tomorrow. There's a place outside the city, a cottage near the old oak where we met years ago. We'll talk there. No titles, no guards. Just us. She hesitated. If anyone finds out, then I'll tell them the truth, he said, that a king can still be a man who keeps his word. She looked at him, torn between fear and longing. Tomorrow, then. He smiled, the first true smile she had seen from him since the war. Tomorrow. Before she could respond, voices echoed from the gate. Your Majesty. Leopold turned sharply. Go, he whispered. Through the orchard. No one will see you. She ran, the gravel crunching under her feet, the torchlight flickering on the walls. When she reached the edge of the garden, she turned back. He was still there, watching her disappear into the shadows. The next day, she rose before dawn and walked the road leading out of the city. The rain had returned, light and steady, turning the air silver. The cottage he spoke of stood hidden among the trees, its roof covered in moss, its door half open. Leopold? She called softly. Inside, a fire burned low. He stood near the window, dressed plainly, his crown nowhere in sight. So you found it, he said. You remember this place? Every stone. I used to come here with my brother when we were boys. It's the only place that ever felt honest. She stepped closer. And now? Now it's ours. For a while, Neither spoke. He poured her a cup of tea, his hands trembling slightly. "They think you're meeting with foreign envoys," he said. "That gives me a few hours before the council starts asking questions." She smiled faintly. "You risk everything for a few hours?" "For you," he said simply. Her breath caught. "You shouldn't say that." "Why not?" "Because I might start believing you." He took her hand again. "Then believe me." The hours passed like minutes. They talked about the years apart, about the war, her exile, the night under the rain when they last saw each other. Every word felt like a wound closing. When the clock struck noon, he rose reluctantly. "I have to go back. They'll send riders if I'm gone too long." She nodded. "Then go." He touched her face gently. "I'll come again. I swear it." She smiled through tears. "You've always sworn things you can't keep. This one I will." He left the cottage and rode toward the city. She stood at the doorway, watching until he vanished behind the hills. That night, she returned to her small room in the city, her heart filled with something she had almost forgotten: hope. But as she reached her door, a folded paper lay on the step. She opened it and froze. It bore the royal seal. Inside, the message was brief. "By order of the council, His Majesty King Leopold is to be joined in marriage to Lady Amalia of Württemberg. The ceremony will take place in 3 days' time." The paper slipped from her fingers. Her neighbor, an old washerwoman, leaned from her window. "Terrible news, isn't it? Another alliance, another queen for the throne. At least the wars will stop." Anneliese forced a nod. "Yes," she said faintly. "At least that." When she returned inside, the silver ring still sat on her table. She picked it up, turning it over in her palm, and whispered, "You promised." Outside, the bells of the cathedral began to ring again, slow, heavy, final. From her window she could see the palace towers shining under the rain, and though she knew it was impossible, she thought she saw a figure standing there, looking back toward the city, unmoving. The wind shifted, carrying the faint echo of trumpets announcing the royal decree. Anneliese's hands shook. She closed the window, but the sound followed her like a curse. Rain came again the next morning, steady and cold, tapping against the window like the memory of a heartbeat. The letter from the council lay on Anneliese's table, the seal cracked, but the words still burning. 3 days. He was to marry another woman in 3 days. She barely moved all morning. When Greta knocked at her door with a basket of bread, Anneliese said she was ill. When the bells rang at noon, she didn't stir, but by dusk, something inside her shifted. She couldn't stay hidden and let the world close its walls around him again. That night, when the city slept, she put on her cloak and walked toward the palace gardens. The guards had doubled, torches flickering against the wet stone. She kept to the shadows, her heart pounding louder than her footsteps. When she reached the fountain where they had met last, she whispered his name into the wind. "Leopold." No answer came. Then, faintly, she heard a voice behind her. "You shouldn't be here." She turned. He stood in the darkness, his expression torn between relief and dread. "They announced your wedding," she said. "I know. Then why call me back here?" He stepped closer. "Because I can't let that happen." Her breath caught. "You can't stop it." "I can," he said. "I'll abdicate. I'll give the crown to the council. They can have it all, my title, my name, everything." "Don't say that. It's already done in my heart." She shook her head. "Leopold, your people need you. They'll survive. Kings are replaced every generation. But you—" He stopped, his voice breaking. "You're not replaceable." She took a step back, her voice trembling. "You think love will feed a kingdom? You think it will protect the borders or silence the ministers? You'll lose everything." He smiled faintly. "Then at least I'll lose it for something real." The rain fell harder. She stared at him, unable to speak. Finally, she whispered, "If you do this, they'll destroy you. They'll call you a traitor to your blood. Let them." He reached for her hand, his touch gentle, almost reverent. "When I was in the field, bleeding into the dirt, I thought of you. The thought that you might still be somewhere under the same sky kept me alive. That's not duty. That's something I can't ignore." She felt tears on her cheeks and didn't know if they were hers or the rain's. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing," he said softly. "Everything." He pulled her close, and for the first time in years, she let herself lean into his warmth. No words, just silence, and the sound of the rain around them. After a while, he stepped back. "Tomorrow night, meet me at the northern gate. There's a path through the forest. We can leave before dawn." Her eyes widened. "Leave? You mean run?" "Yes, there's a ship waiting at the river port. Once we're aboard, they'll have no power over us." "Leopold, think about what you're saying." "I've thought of nothing else." She hesitated, shaking her head. "If I go with you, it won't just be your crown you lose, it'll be your country." He smiled sadly. "Then let them have it. I've already given them enough." Before she could reply, voices echoed from the garden wall. Guards. Closer this time. He caught her hand. "Go now. I'll see you tomorrow night. I swear it." She hesitated only a moment before turning and running through the rain, the sound of his footsteps fading behind her. The next day passed in a blur. Word spread through the city. The royal wedding preparations had begun. Carriages lined the palace gates, and servants carried silks and flowers through the streets. Anneliese moved like a ghost, avoiding everyone's eyes. Every hour felt heavier than the last. By nightfall, she packed her few belongings, her herbs, the letter, and the handkerchief he had once given her. When the moon rose, she walked through the silent streets toward the northern gate. The forest loomed ahead, dark and wet. She waited beneath an old oak, listening for the sound of hooves. Minutes passed, then an hour. Finally, faintly, she heard it, the rhythm of a horse approaching. He appeared through the mist, his cloak soaked, his face pale but determined. "You came," she whispered. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "I almost didn't believe you." He dismounted, breathless. "There's no turning back now." She looked at him, her fear plain. "And if the council stops you?" "Then they'll have to catch me first." He reached for her hand, and together they started down the narrow forest path. The rain had stopped, but the trees still dripped, their branches glistening in the moonlight. For a while, neither spoke. Then she said quietly, "What will happen to your people if you leave?" "They'll be fine. I've left orders with the council to govern until they name a regent." "You've planned this?" "For months," he admitted. "I just didn't know if I'd find the courage to do it." She stopped walking. "And if I hadn't come tonight?" He turned to her. "Then I'd have gone alone. But I prayed you would." They walked until they reached a clearing where a small carriage waited. A driver bowed when he saw Leopold. "Everything's ready, Your Majesty." "Not that title anymore," Leopold said quietly. "Not after tonight." The driver nodded and climbed onto the seat. Leopold helped Anneliese inside. She sat close to the window, watching the trees blur past as they began to move. "Where will we go?" she asked. "South," he said. "To the coast." Then across the sea. She smiled faintly. "You make it sound so simple. It doesn't have to be complicated to be right." Hours passed in silence. The road grew rougher, the forest denser. Near dawn, the driver called back, "We're almost there." But before the words had faded, the sound of another carriage thundered from behind them. Leopold's head snapped up. "Riders!" Anneliese gripped his arm. "Who is it?" He peered out the window. "The Royal Guard." The driver whipped the reins. "Hold on!" The horses galloped faster, mud flying from their hooves. The chase grew louder, torches flaring behind them, shouts echoing through the trees. Anneliese clung to Leopold's hand. "They'll catch us." "Not if we reach the river," he said. "It's just ahead." But the path narrowed, and the carriage jolted violently as one wheel struck a stone. The driver shouted, struggling to control the horses. "Leopold!" Anneliese cried. He pulled her close as the carriage lurched again. "We'll make it." Suddenly, the horses reared. The driver lost control, and the carriage skidded off the road. Wood splintered, glass shattered, and they were thrown into the mud. Leopold pulled her up quickly. "Run!" She stumbled beside him through the trees, branches slashing at her arms. Behind them, voices shouted orders, closer now. They burst through the last line of trees and saw the river below, wide and dark under the fading moon. A small boat waited at the bank, the oars tied, the lantern unlit. Leopold helped her climb in. "Go, Anneliese, push off," she hesitated. "And you?" "I'll follow. Just go." But before she could move, a voice rang out behind them. "Stop! In the name of the crown!" They turned. Soldiers stood on the ridge, torches blazing, swords drawn. The captain dismounted and stepped forward. His voice was cold and weary. "Your Majesty, don't make this harder than it must be." Leopold's jaw tightened. It's already hard enough. Think of your people, of your oath. My oath was to protect them, not to live a lie. The captain's gaze shifted to Annalise. If she leaves with you, there will be no forgiveness. Not from the council, not from history. Leopold took her hand. Then let history judge me. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the captain lowered his torch. So be it. Behind him, the soldiers advanced. Leopold turned to Annalise. Into the boat, now. She shook her head. Not without you. He looked at her, his voice breaking. Please. Before she could answer, a shout rose from the ridge. One of the horses reared, and chaos erupted. Torches fell into the grass, flames sparking in the rain-soaked brush. Leopold pushed her toward the boat. Go. She stumbled into it as he untied the rope. The current caught the hull, dragging it from the shore. Leopold, she cried, reaching for him. He took one last step toward the edge, his hand outstretched. And in that moment the soldiers surged forward. The river swallowed the noise of the soldiers' shouts. The boat spun with the current, carrying Annalise away from the shore before she could even scream his name again. Torches flickered on the ridge, then vanished behind the curtain of rain. She gripped the edge of the boat, trembling, her breath coming in gasps. Leopold, she cried into the wind, but the night answered with silence. The current dragged her downstream for miles. When dawn finally broke, the river calmed, and she found herself adrift among reeds. Exhausted, she steered the small boat toward the bank and stumbled onto the muddy shore. There was no sign of him, no hoofprints, no voices, only the quiet drip of rain from the trees. She searched for hours, calling his name until her throat ached, but the forest remained still. When at last her legs gave out, she sat beside the river and pressed her face into her hands. He had been so close. One more step, and he would have been beside her. By nightfall, she found shelter in an abandoned mill and lit a small fire with the flint she carried. She told herself he might have escaped another way, that he was hiding, that he would find her soon. But deep down, she knew she had lost him again. 2 days later, a merchant's cart found her walking barefoot along the road. The driver, a kind old man, offered her bread and a place to ride. "Where are you bound, girl?" he asked. "Anywhere that isn't here," she whispered. He nodded, saying nothing more. They traveled south through villages celebrating the royal wedding. News spread faster than rain. King Leopold was to marry Lady Amalia after all. The council had convinced him, they said. It was for peace, for stability, for the kingdom's honor. Annalise said nothing, only turned her face away. When the cart reached the edge of the valley, she thanked the driver and continued on foot until she reached a small monastery perched above the river. The monks took her in without questions. She offered to work in exchange for food and shelter. Weeks passed, the days became simple, tending the gardens, healing travelers, cleaning the chapel floors. The silence was a comfort she hadn't known she needed. One evening, Father Matthias, the abbot, found her sitting outside watching the sunset. "You don't speak much," he said. "I've spoken enough in my life," she replied. He smiled gently. "Then let the world speak to you for a while. It tends to do that when we're quiet enough to listen." She nodded, but her eyes stayed on the river below. Months turned into a year. Bavaria healed from the war. The capital grew brighter again. Every so often, travelers passing through the monastery brought tales of the new king and his distant queen. They said the marriage was cordial, but cold. The king rarely appeared at court. Some whispered he spent his nights alone, walking the palace gardens in silence. Annalise tried not to listen, but every time someone mentioned his name, her hands stilled, her breath caught. One morning she was tending herbs in the cloister when a messenger arrived. He wore the royal insignia. "I seek a woman named Annalise Bauer," he said. Father Matthias frowned. "We have many women who serve here. Who sends for her?" "The crown," the man said simply. Annalise froze. "Why?" The messenger turned to her. "King Leopold requests your presence in Munich. It's urgent." Her pulse pounded. "That's impossible." "He said you would understand," the man replied. "He's ill." Annalise's hands trembled as she wiped them on her apron. "When must I leave?" "Tonight. I'll take you myself." Father Matthias placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Go," he said. "If someone calls your name after so long, it means your story with them isn't finished yet." She packed only what she needed, the herbs she'd dried, the handkerchief, and the ring that had never left her pocket. The journey to Munich took 2 days. The city looked different now, richer, cleaner, quieter. The palace gates stood open, and guards guided her through a hall lined with white marble and golden banners. A court physician met her at the entrance of the royal chambers. "You are the healer from the mountains?" "Yes." He led her inside. "The king has refused every remedy. Perhaps he'll listen to you." The room was dim, the air heavy with the scent of rain and burning candles. Leopold lay in a chair by the window, wrapped in a dark robe. His hair was longer now, streaked with grey at the temples. When he turned, his eyes lit up as if he were waking from a dream. "Anneliese." She stopped, unable to breathe. "You're alive," he smiled faintly. "You thought I wouldn't be. I searched for you," she whispered. "At the river. I waited, I know. They dragged me back to the palace that night. I couldn't reach you." She came closer, her voice trembling. "Why did you send for me?" He looked down at his hands. "Because the council keeps me alive but not living. They speak of alliances, treaties, heirs. But my heart has been somewhere else all these years." "You shouldn't have called me," she said softly. "You're married now." He shook his head. "Amalia left months ago. There was no love between us, only duty. She returned to her homeland, and I let her go." Anneliese's eyes filled with tears. "And now I'm tired," he said. "Of fighting, of pretending. I wanted to see you once more before it's too late." She knelt beside him, taking his hand. "Don't say that. You're not dying." He smiled weakly. "The doctors say otherwise." "Then they're wrong," she said fiercely. "You survived worse." He touched her cheek. "You haven't changed, still arguing with fate. Someone has to." He laughed softly, then coughed. "Tell me, do you still keep that handkerchief?" She reached into her pocket and held it out. "Always." He closed his fingers over hers. "Then maybe the promise still holds." "Which one?" "In another life, I'd come back for you." She tried to smile through her tears. "You did come back." "Not yet," he said quietly. "Not the way I meant to." They sat together in silence until the candles burned low. When she rose to fetch more light, he caught her wrist. "Stay," he whispered. "I can't sleep if I think you'll vanish again." "I won't." He leaned his head against her arm, eyes half closed. "I thought I'd forgotten your voice. I tried to, but every time it rained I heard it again." Anneliese swallowed hard. "You shouldn't have to remember." "I want to." She stayed with him through the night, tending his fever, watching the color fade from his cheeks and return again. By morning the storm outside had passed. The sky broke open with light, and a gentle wind moved through the room. When he woke, he looked stronger, calmer. "The council will hate me for this," he said. "For what?" "For asking you to stay." She smiled faintly. "Let them hate." He took her hand again. "I've spent my whole life being their king. Let me spend what's left being yours." Her heart stilled. "Leopold, don't answer now. Just promise you won't disappear again." "I promise." He leaned back, closing his eyes, his hand still wrapped around hers. "Then that's enough." For the first time in years, his breathing steadied, slow and peaceful. She sat beside him until the sun touched the horizon. The palace grew quiet. The city outside seemed to hold its breath. When the bells rang for evening prayer, Anneliese looked out the window. The gardens below glowed gold beneath the fading light. She turned to speak to him, but he had fallen asleep again, his head resting against the chair, a faint smile on his lips. She brushed a strand of hair from his face. "Rest now," she whispered. "I'll be here when you wake." Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain from the distant hills, and for the first time in a long while she felt no fear, only calm, like the quiet between storms. The next morning began with rain. Soft, steady, gentle, like a memory. The bells of the city echoed faintly through the mist as Anneliese sat beside Leopold's bed, listening to his breathing. He had slept for hours, deeper than before, but his color had returned, and when he opened his eyes, there was light in them again. "You stayed," he murmured. "I promised," she said, smiling. "And I don't break promises." He tried to sit up, grimacing, and she hurried to help him. "Careful. I'm fine," he insisted, though his voice was still hoarse. "You're the one who looks tired." She laughed softly. "You sound like yourself again." Then maybe I'm not dying after all. Don't say things like that. He looked at her for a long time, his gaze steady and warm. Annalise, when I woke just now, I thought for a moment that everything had been a dream, the war, the crown, the years between us. And then I saw you sitting there, and I realized it was the other way around. Everything before this was the dream. She felt her throat tighten. You shouldn't say such things to a woman who once thought you were gone. I mean every word, he said quietly. Before she could answer, a knock came at the door. A court attendant entered, bowing. Your Majesty, the council requests your presence. There are matters concerning the succession and— Tell them to wait, Leopold interrupted. The man hesitated. Sire, they insist. Then they can insist outside this room, he said. Leave us. When the door closed, he turned back to her. I'm tired of living by other men's demands, tired of letting them decide who I am. You're a king, she said gently. He smiled faintly. And yet you're the only one who's ever spoken to me like a man. She reached for his hand. You don't have to prove anything, not to them, not to me. I'm not trying to prove, and he said, I'm trying to live. Later that day, when the council finally forced its way into the chamber, they found the king standing by the window, fully dressed, the rain-silvered sky reflected in his eyes. Your Majesty, the Chancellor began carefully, we've heard troubling news. A woman from the countryside has been seen in your quarters. The court expects clarification. Leopold turned, his expression calm but firm. You mean my guest? Guest? The Chancellor repeated, glancing nervously at the others. Sire, it would be unwise to— Enough, Leopold said. You think because I wear this crown, I owe you my soul. You forget who I am. The room fell silent. Leopold walked past them, opened the door to the adjoining chamber, and motioned for Annalise to step in. She hesitated but obeyed, her hands clasped in front of her. The council members stared in stunned silence. This is Annalise Bauer, Leopold said evenly. She saved my life once. She has my respect, my gratitude, and— He met her eyes. My heart. Gasps filled the room. The Chancellor stammered, Your Majesty, such words are the truth, Leopold interrupted, and I will no longer hide the truth to keep appearances. The youngest of the ministers spoke up. But, sire, the throne will endure, Leopold said, with or without your approval. For a moment no one dared breathe. Then he turned to Annalise. You see, they can't imagine a world built on something as simple as love. She shook her head softly. You're provoking them. Good, he said, smiling faintly. It's time someone did. The council left in silence, too stunned to protest further. When the last door closed, Annalise looked at him. You shouldn't have done that. I've done worse, he said. And for far less, she sighed, half laughing. You'll start another war, this time with words. Then I'll fight it gladly, he replied. Days passed and the palace grew restless with rumors. Some said the king was bewitched. Others whispered that he'd lost his mind. But Leopold ignored them all. He spent his mornings walking through the gardens with her, his afternoons listening to her stories about the monastery and the villages she had healed. At night, when the rain returned, they sat by the fire in silence, content just to exist side by side. One evening he said quietly, You never asked why I sent for you after so long. I thought you were dying, she said. I was, he replied, smiling faintly. But not from illness. She looked at him, her heart aching. Leopold. Listen, he said. The night they brought me back from the river, I swore I'd never see you again. It was the only way to keep you safe, but I've spent every day since breaking that promise in my thoughts. So if fate gave me one more chance, I knew I couldn't waste it. Her eyes filled with tears. You still believe in fate? He took her hand. I believe in you. The following morning, the city awoke to the sound of bells, not the slow toll of mourning, but the bright, jubilant kind reserved for weddings and coronations. Crowds gathered in the streets as carriages filled the palace courtyard. Annalise stood by the window, confusion in her eyes. What is happening? Leopold appeared behind her, dressed in formal attire, though his expression was soft, almost playful. You'll see. He offered her his arm. Will you walk with me? Where? To the chapel, he said. I asked the council for an audience. I think they expect me to announce my abdication. Her eyes widened. Leopold, you can't. He smiled. I'm not going to abdicate. I'm going to tell them the truth they fear most, that love and power don't have to destroy each other." She hesitated, but his hand was steady. The chapel was filled with nobles, ministers, guards, every figure of rank and influence in Bavaria. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as they entered together. Leopold walked to the altar, turned to face them and said simply, "Today, I marry the woman who taught me what it means to live." Gasps filled the air. The Chancellor stepped forward, pale with shock. "Sire, this is impossible." "It's already done," Leopold said. And before the man could speak again, the old bishop who had once crowned his father rose from the front pew. His voice, though frail, carried strength. "If the king speaks of love before God and his people, then let him be heard." The chapel fell silent. Anneliese trembled, but Leopold turned to her, his eyes warm. "You once told me fate isn't kind. Maybe that's true, but sometimes it gives us exactly what we need," she whispered. "You're sure?" "More than I've ever been sure of anything." The bishop began the vows. His words were simple, unadorned. And when Leopold spoke his promise, it felt less like a ceremony and more like an echo of every promise they had ever whispered under rain and moonlight. When it was her turn, she could barely speak. "I've loved you in silence, in distance, in every storm that kept us apart. If there's a life after this one, I'll love you there too." He smiled through tears. "Then this life will do just fine." When the bishop declared them bound, the bells began to ring again, louder this time, joyous and wild. The crowd erupted in applause, though half were still too shocked to believe what they'd witnessed. Leopold took her hand and kissed it gently. "My queen," he whispered. She laughed softly. "I was a healer once. I don't know how to be a queen." "Then heal the kingdom," he said. "That will be enough." That evening the city glowed with light. Every window flickered with candles, every street filled with music. The people, once skeptical, now cheered for the king who had chosen love over politics. In the palace garden, where the rain had finally stopped, Leopold and Anneliese walked together beneath the blooming linden trees. The air was warm, carrying the scent of spring. He stopped by the fountain and turned to her. "Do you remember the first time you saw me?" "In the forest," she said. "You looked half dead." He laughed. "And you looked like trouble." She smiled. "You were right." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Every path I took led back to you. Every battle, every mistake, none of it matters now. Don't say that. You've built a kingdom." He shook his head. "We'll build it together." The moon rose, silver and soft, over the gardens. He leaned close, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you still believe in promises?" She nodded. "Always." "Then let me make one more," he said. "Not for another life, but for this one. I will never leave you again. Not for duty, not for fear. From this day on, wherever I go, you go too." Her heart beat fast. "And when the rain comes? Then we'll stand beneath it together." He drew her close, their foreheads touching, the years of loss and silence dissolving between them. The first drops of rain began to fall again, soft and cool, sliding down their faces. Leopold smiled. "Seems even the sky wants to remember." Anneliese laughed through her tears. "Then let it." He kissed her, slow and sure, the world fading until there was nothing left but the sound of the rain and the warmth of his hands. When they finally pulled apart, the city bells rang once more, echoing across the valley. Leopold looked at her, eyes bright. "In this life, I came back for you." And under the rain, with the whole kingdom watching from afar, she whispered, "And I was here waiting. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.